Hi there, it's October the 19th and we're continuing our voyage through Paul's first letter to Timothy. We're in chapter 4 and we're reading from verses 1 to 16, the whole chapter. In the first part of this chapter, Paul homes in on those who are teaching falsely. He says the Spirit actually says that there are going to be those who are teaching falsely who need to be rejected and dealt with. And it may well be that Timothy is being instructed here by Paul about these teachers, these particular teachers who are coming in and troubling the local community. There seem to be teachings about the forbidding of marriage and teaching about not eating certain things. These sound actually reminiscent of what the Essene sect would have taught, the ones who lived at Qumran in the Dead Sea. There are probably elements of this creeping into what was to become Gnosticism. But Paul is basically saying, look, these are the teachings of demons. These are what he would call heterodoxy, even pseudodoxy, false teaching, he says, and they're to be rejected. And the antidote to this is good teaching, is teaching that is given out of the heart of the righteous ones, given out of Timothy's heart, and he says that this will bring nourishment. And he says, keep away from the myths and keep away from the things that are being made up by people. And he particularly says the kind of things that old women mumble on about. Now, maybe there were women in their community who were sowing these false teachings that Paul has in mind. And Paul then encourages Timothy to get trained, to go into the gymnasium of God, as it were. He uses a word, gymnase, that is connected with the gymnasium. And the gymnasium is the place for training, the place where athletes train. And Paul encourages him to train not in bodily form. He says that's of limited potential, limited benefit. He says, but actually train your spirit, get trained in godliness, because that's the kind of training that is going to produce good fruit and also carries the promise of life, not just for now, but for the future. And he wants to see Timothy coming into this, because this is what Paul says he's struggling for. This is what he desires for the people there, to know God, who is the Saviour. He's the rescuer of all, and especially of those who believe. Paul comes to a close in this chapter by encouraging Timothy not to allow others to patronize him, not to allow others to look down on him because of his youth, but to declare these things with love, with faith, with holiness, to be himself an example to the church. The church is looking for leadership by example. The church is leading for how Timothy models this life of Jesus Christ. And so he's encouraging Timothy, however people look on his age, however young he seems, to go for that. And he says, these things actually were laid on, that the gift was given by the laying on of hands, and with prophecy. This is God's calling. This is God's commission upon him. This is not something he has because by virtue of his experience or age. It's something God has laid on him. And therefore Paul is encouraging Timothy to go for it, and to also keep himself clear and clean, his life clean. He says, pay attention to yourself and your teaching. So he's not just talking about how Timothy teaches, he's actually talking about Timothy's own life, because the enemy is constantly looking for ways of tripping us up. And he says, if we do that, if he does that, then it's not only going to be him that benefits from it, he's not going to be the only one who's rescued, but others will be rescued as well. Let's today hear Paul's words to Timothy of getting into training, of going into that gymnasium of faith, being a gymnast of God in that sense, and making sure that we are giving models and examples to others that display the goodness of God, that display the hope of godliness, that display the life of purity and of joy in God. Let's be thinking of doing that today and ask God to help us by his Spirit. Have a very good October 19th.